So now in the last lectures, we learned how we can write truly dynamic views by using dynamic path segments, and of course also by using some Python features like dictionaries and so on. And that's all good to have. Now we always strive for such dynamic solutions and dynamic approaches simply because that allows us to write less code and more maintainable code, which is easier to change. If we, for example, add a new month here, which is kind of unrealistic, I guess, but if we would have a 13th month, we would just have to add one new entry to this dictionary, and we wouldn't need to change anything about the code down there, because it pulls in all the information automatically from that dictionary. And that's always something we want to aim for. Now, there is one aspect in this file where we don't really have dynamic code though. And spotting it can be quite tricky if you're new to Django. Still, do you see something here which could be hard to maintain or which we might need to change unnecessarily if we change something else in this application? Well, it's this redirect URL here. I hard-coded /challenges in there. Now I need to add that here because I want to redirect to /challenges/month name if we enter something like 1, 2, 3, and so on. The problem with that is that this challenges path with which this redirect path starts is hard-coded in our project URL config here. We say that for any requests starting with /challenges, we want to include our challenges URLs. Now, what if I would change this to just challenge? So without an S here. I don't change it here. I don't change the challenges app folder name. I just change the path for which I want to reach into that challenges folder name here in the project-wide URL config. If we save that, if I try to visit challenges December, it breaks. But that's to be expected. If I enter /challenge/December without an S, it works though. But if I enter /challenge without an S/1, it again breaks because we redirect to challenges/January. We still have the S in there because I still need to change that in the views.py file. Here, I need to remove that S. Now that's the problem here. Of course, we're probably not going to change our URLs all the time, but it's also not unrealistic that in bigger websites, maybe also projects where a lot of colleagues are working on, we definitely might have such changes from time to time. And even worse than that, some small errors might then slip through, and we might change the URL in one part of our project, but not in all other parts, and we might not even detect this error until we deployed our application and visitors are actively facing that error. And that's of course something we want to avoid. Of course, we can avoid such errors by thoroughly testing everything, by searching for usages of /challenges, but it would be even better if this entire path here, this URL to which we want to redirect, would be constructed in a more dynamic way. And thankfully, that is something which is possible with Python and Django. We first of all need to give our URL a name, the URL to which we might want to construct a path later anywhere in our app. We can also by default give every URL which we set up a name. But we definitely want to give this URL path a name here so that we can use a little extra feature Django has for constructing paths pointing at that URL. For this, we simply add a third argument here to the path function which we're calling to set up that path. And here we add the name keyword argument. So this is a keyword argument defined by Django for this path function. And we set this equal to a string with a name value of your choice. For example, month challenge. But this name is up to you. Now that this URL has a name, we can use that name to construct paths, URLs, pointing at that registered URL. So for example, here, when we redirect, instead of hard coding the URL like this, we can construct our redirect URL or our redirect path by using another utility function Django exposes to us. Now that is a function we need to import from django.urls, and it is the reverse function. You need to add this import in the views.py file, and reverse allows us to create paths by referring to the names of these paths, of these URLs. We call reverse, and we then start with the name of our URL. So in my case here, I assigned month-challenge as a name. Hence here, I start by passing month-challenge as a first argument to reverse. Now, what does reverse do now? It now figures out how to correctly build a full path to this URL. And it takes into account that it needs to prefix this with challenge. So it would effectively build a path that looks like this, challenge. Now, of course, we also need to enter the concrete month name as part of the URL. We want something like challenge January here. And therefore, reverse takes a second argument, which now allows us to pass in any args we might need for this specific URL. Now, not all URLs require args, but in our application, they actually do. Both registered URLs we have for this challenges app do have a dynamic segment. And it's this dynamic segment which we want to pass in. So here, the args would be one argument, one value for this dynamic segment. So here, args actually is an array, because you could have URLs with multiple dynamic segments. Here we only have one dynamic segment though. And therefore, args is an array or a list with only one value. And that's the redirect month in our case. And redirect month will be something like January, February, March, and so on. Don't forget. And hence, Python or Django, with help of the reverse function, will construct a string path that looks like this. Challenge, because of this, and then January, because we set this arg for this URL, which we identified by this name we set for this URL config, for this entry here. And then it's this constructed redirect path which we want to use down there. And the great advantage here now is that we can now change that URL and also the parts leading up to that URL, like here in the main project URLs.py file, however we want. As long as we don't change the name, which you typically don't do that often, you won't have any problems. So if I now save everything, if I visit challenge/January, that still works. But if I enter challenge/1, I'm also forwarded to the correct month challenge now. So this path is now being built correctly. And if I go to the main URLs.py file and I change this back to challenges here, and I save that, if I now visit challenges/1, it automatically correctly forwards me to challenges January. So it keeps that S because we're not constructing our redirect path by hard coding the full path, but by instead pointing at the name of the URL, and Django then automatically figures out what the correct URL is here. And that is a super important feature. And whenever you are creating paths to which you want to redirect or to which you want to link, you really want to consider using that reverse function instead of manually hard coding the path. Because if you manually hard code, whenever you change something about the URL, like the S here, you will destroy all your hard coded paths and you will have to manually fix them. By using reverse, and named paths, named URLs, you won't have that problem. So that's the reverse function, a super important function. And now we got truly dynamic views here, which can deal with any months and which really work in a way that requires minimum input from us as a developer and where we can make changes without having to change dozens of places in our code base. And that's always what we want to aim for.